Welcome back to the Eric Krown Crypto channel. Wishing you a happy early start on this nice long-term Sunday. We're going to be going over some long-term setups, not necessarily like a macro Sunday. Very little has actually changed there, so I don't really have too much to update with that, despite all of the news floating above overhead. But there are several setups starting to emerge for this current price action that I do think are a lot more interesting and will very likely take Bitcoin over the next 7 to 21 days. Could be even confirmed as soon as tonight's daily closure, that is. Anyways, before we get into it, I should let you know that one, we have a sale coming on tomorrow, so hold off on like buying anything because you'll probably save yourself a few bucks, or you will save yourself a few bucks. And then also two, you can get the Jewel Light for free for 1 month plus 0% on maker fees for derivative contract orders on Bybit for 30 days as well. If you follow the directions over here on the right hand side, they'll also be in the description below as well. Anyways, let's jump right into it and start off right in over here. Starting off with the most rudimentary point of the day, and that is going to be this: Bitcoin on the daily time frame resting above, valiantly, dare I say, above the 200 moving average right here, which is the white moving average. Now it's just typically like a long-term moving average, that you can kind of get general ideas of if things or big money managers, they're going to be generally bullish, generally bearish. If you're above it, generally bullish; below it, generally bearish. Blah 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 blah. Obviously, that's for more like long-term big money managers, not for more short-term active traders. Duh. Anyways, so far so good. And I would be looking at that as like a major pivot on a daily closing basis, meaning that if Bitcoin can close below there, that's at the point where, the doors start to get open towards a move, at least 19,000, but probably more accurately into the low 18s, actually, if that does occur. But before that is relevant, I do want to bring up this big point over here. So, and this is probably going to be a big piece of today's analysis, the daily setup on the daily Jewel. So in this case, we've only seen the Jewel get to the 20 read, which I define as extreme critical zone. We've only seen it actually happen 13 times in Bitcoin's history. What we've seen after that, however, is typically a pretty sizable bounce. Not a reversal. I'm not talking about reversal like on the, for like a long-term scale, like lows are in, blah, 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 things never go down again, but sizable bounce. And of course, we've seen it even several times in the past year. But off of the full history of Bitcoin, it's happened 13 prior times, and 11 of those prior times have led towards sizable bounces. That means that 2 have failed, and we'll look at the actual data soon enough. But in this case, what the measurements are going to be taken from is on the first tick that closes white, as you can see right here. So this was the most recent one in June of last year, and that precipitated a pretty long sideways period, but ended up in a pretty decent bounce, close to about 17% or so. We also saw one right in over here, similar thing, sideways for a while, and then about a 10% bounce to the upside over about 18 days. Now these were actually like a lot less impressive, to be honest with you, compared to a lot of the ones that we've seen in the history of Bitcoin. But generally speaking, when we do see this particular setup, these statistics have been relevant. Again, just going over right here. Okay, yes, we're on the right pane. All right, my spreadsheets are once again showing us the way. 11 out of 13 played out with a nice upside move. But as we just saw, just because it would suggest an upside move does not mean that things can, one, take their time, and two, retest the lows. We just don't want to see closures below the current wick low. That would be like the concerning thing, and indicate that it's going to be invalidated. Anyways, off of those 11 out of 13, that would give it about an 84.5% hit rate. Again, not a whole hell of a lot of iterations there, but pretty damn good for the data that we do have. The average return on the gainers was about 15.25%, with a standard deviation of about 8.25%. So that gives us a nice range between about 7% all the way up to 23.5% on the upper end. On the losing side, for the 2 trades that did lose, they had an average return of about almost 12%. And also we can get an average amount of the days, which was 21.5 days. Standard deviation of about 7.25 days. Basically, what does that give you? It gives you a range between about 14 days all the way up to 28 days. So basically taking us throughout the month of March into early April is where this would likely forecast if it does play out to the upside. On the losing side, a lot less, about a week and a half to 2 weeks or so. It's probably what we would expect, but really a lack of data there, to be quite frank with you. So I would not trust those numbers or not put too much on it. So here's the thing. First off, is this confirmed? No, it's not. It needs to actually close and turn white, and then we really need to see like the next tick get out of the critical zone. That would be like the really good thing to see. If you don't see that happen, high probability is going to be a major failure. But in this case, one thing before the next, and for right now, it's going to have a chance later tonight, and then tomorrow we want to see it follow through. So, could that equate with more lows coming in on Monday? Perhaps yes. I mean, on a wick basis, yeah. Just don't want to see closure on massively new lows. And in fact, just kind of like the general playbook for the way that a lot of these sort of events go. And when I talk about these events, I'm talking about like major scary events, like truly terrifying, circumstance. Right now we're dealing with, potential major contagion to a lot of the financial sector, which obviously would be an issue. Now, I don't know how serious that is personally. I'm not I'm not an expert or claim to be in that sort of a realm. I don't think really too many people are, honestly, because it's extremely complicated and it's just extremely fucking complicated. That's what I know. I know that it's too complicated for me to understand. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that the general playbook for these sort of events is this. One, things sell off on Thursday, Friday, close big down on Friday, which we obviously got on traditional markets. Two, then over the weekend, all these scary news stories come out. People start to panic more and more and more. You're probably seeing that on Twitter and whatever media sources that you might be frequenting as well. Three, then on Monday, people can actually trade again or take their money out of the bank. So, that's when if new lows are going to be made, that would typically be the day, maybe Tuesday, but probably Monday, as people get to express those fears now by taking action, because obviously you can't over the weekend with traditional markets. And then usually by like Tuesday, Wednesday, dust starts to settle, and you probably get a turnaround. The old saying is turnaround Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. Thursday is typically a pullback, and Friday typically close up. Anyways, in this case, one thing before the next, but so far so good in that case, and that would suggest that Bitcoin is a lot more likely to trade back up. Before potentially going down later. I mean, it's definitely still possible, but I still maintain my overall position. I do still have the indications that say that it's a higher probability of the lows being in, like over here at $15,500 than not. Can that be wrong? Yeah, absolutely. But right now Bitcoin's trading at $20,000 and the lows are at $15,500. It's okay. Anyways, the real question is does it retest around those lows? So obviously that would be a lot more concerning. Anyways, so let's play around with numbers here. What would things look like if we went for the average return, which is 15%? Well, again, we're kind of getting way ahead of ourselves here because we don't even have the closure. But potentially, that would actually be back up to low 23s. Obviously, that would be the average. What would be the lower end of the first standard deviation? Maybe around 7 to 8%. That put Bitcoin at about upper 21s, low 22s. And if it really goes for one of these crazy moves, which I think is unlikely here, to the top end of the first standard deviation, about 23.5%, which would probably put Bitcoin back around the prior high, if I had to guess. Yeah, that actually put Bitcoin back at $25,000. So again, one thing before the next will be about an update on this one tomorrow, but I thought that was rather interesting and perhaps worth knowing. Anyways, moving on to the next thing, I do want to get into the Gaussian channel yet again over here. Now, when we're going over the Gaussian channel on the 5-day, I do want to say that while Bitcoin is potentially going to have a major setup here that could lead towards a sizable bounce, the 5-day does say it's quite likely that we will see a retest of the lows first. As yesterday's closure for the 5-day time frame did certainly hold up above the bottom side of the 5-day Gaussian channel, but now you kind of want to see the channel itself start to level out, get a neutral slope similar to what you see over here and over here, and that's at the point where you're probably a little bit more likely to maybe reclaim the mean band in that case. But for right now, I think it'd be absolutely classic if on Monday we see things first initially come down, somewhere around mid-19s, somewhere around the current wick low, and then try for a bounce there. That would probably be what I'd be looking for. If things are going to indeed hold. Obviously, if the next period closes below the bottom side of the Gaussian channel, which is pretty much about where the daily turn and simple is, at about 19,600, that's at the point where, hey, very likely we're going to see probably low 18s, probably low 18s with an attempt for a bounce at, like 19, something like that. Anyways, moving on here, and let me just get my notes back out again because my phone has closed for whatever reason. Yep. Okay. We got that. Also, the 4-hour HPDR indicator over here would be showing, similar to yesterday, that we are kind of grinding up against the median of the blue 50% of historic returns range. So if you're going to be looking for a rejection and kind of retesting around our current lows or, somewhere reasonably close to it, this would very likely be the area that, it would probably come from. That also would imply that if we start to see closures, this is on Bybit, by the way, Bybit perps, because there's like a massive price differential, by the way, between these ones. We need to really see it close back above, 20,800 or so. At that point, you're very likely going to see a move into probably the mid 21s after that, early this next week. I think that's less likely though. In this case, again, something like this, maybe to open up the week and then try for like a real bounce sometime after Monday. Anyways, moving on now. The daily also on the HPDR indicator is very interesting right here. So let me actually get rid of the drawings here. They're just not relevant towards the conversation. But you can see that Bitcoin or the daily is obviously is very obviously closing well below that blue 50% of historic returns range lows, which happened right here. That was giving us that initial bias that's saying, hey, yeah, things are more likely to go down, the past week, perhaps all the way down to, to the 80% of historic returns range lows, which, yeah, it did. But now there's going to be potentially a setup emerging on the other side, a pretty damn powerful one as well, dare I say, because if we start to see things trade sideways here, meaning no continuation on a closing basis below like $20,000, then naturally volatility is going to start to, contract. Right now, it's not at all. You can see this white portion of it. It's very obviously expanding right here. But if you start to see it kind of level off and then go down in a close over closure basis, well, at that point, mean reversion is going to be very, very likely. And how likely? Well, we can go reference the data over here when we backtest this one, which actually does have 50 iterations for a daily, which is rather rare, but also a rather high strike rate, in my opinion. 37 out of 50 played out with a big upside move. And this is pretty much almost the full data for the daily, by the way, that's available for Bitcoin. So that gives it about a 74% strike rate. And then, of course, the average return on that was about 12%. The average return on a loss, however, from that was also 12%. So what does that essentially say? It essentially says that once we actually get that set up, which right now it's well and far away, that would kind of collude with the daily Joule potential setup, which again, this would suggest, maybe into like the deep 22s, or if it fails, then what are we looking at? We're looking at probably 18, somewhere around low $18,000. Is probably going to be likely if that were to happen, but a higher probability of an upside move alongside the Joule setup that we looked at over here. So, interesting as I kind of play hand in hand as well. Anyways, what else do we have? We also have, let me see how deep in this video we are. 13 minutes. All right, let's go. Let's end on this, or let's actually go through two more ones. Daily stochastic oscillator. This is another one that we are following a lot over this past week. It actually is starting to cross the upside here, which, all of the crosses to the upside above the 15 read over the past 3 years has also led to some, pretty sizable bounces. The stats on this one are less impressive than the Joule. It's about 71.5% strike rate, only 14 iterations, over the past 3 years though. But damn it, wrong one. There we also on the wrong one. There we go, back on it. But an average return about 70%. Actually, is this average return about the same? Average return on the Joule was 15. Yeah, okay. Average return on the stochastic also was 17.5. Interesting, but also kind of play hand in hand for a higher probability of bounce. But this one less impressive than the other ones, so to speak, and also will be invalidated with the daily closure below the current wick low. Cool. So we've gone through that. And then the last point over here is just something I want to end on. Despite all of the headlines kind of flying about, and despite all of the extreme fear that's been going on as well, and a lot of it for good reason, to be fair, things are mostly unchanged as far as the macro timeframes go. On the monthly time frame, this was one of the big indicators. This was one of the big setups I was looking at as being indicative of suggesting that the low is in. We've also said on this channel very, very specifically that while this has printed, that does not mean that Bitcoin can't come back down and retest somewhere around the lows. Even, or before, it was like I was saying $20,000 is certainly not the question. Could we even see like a full on retest of the lows? I mean, you don't want to see that, obviously, but it could happen, I suppose. Anyways, let me explain the setup here, and then we'll go over some history examples with this. And basically, it is this. On the monthly accumulation and distribution indicator, we've observed that any of the slope changes in the extreme zones, in the extreme green or the extreme red zones, have correlated with macro shifts in direction for Bitcoin, thus effectively calling the macro lows already being in, and on the high side, the macro highs already being in. But in this case, this is a study of the lows. So you can see it on the charts right here. It's been pretty damn good in Bitcoin's history. Anytime that we have gotten the slope change actually happening, the low was already in. The macro low was already in. But as you can see in not necessarily 2012, but definitely 2015, the low was retested. There was no closing lower lows, certainly, but the low was retested pretty fucking harshly right here, as you can see in August off of the February lows, or sorry, the January lows. So like 8 months later. Same thing over here in 2019, right? In 2019, the low was about 3,400 on a closing basis. It got pretty damn close on the Rona dump over here about a year and a half later in March 2020, getting to about 3,800, 3,900 low. So is it reasonable to think that that we could see a wick down there, in like extreme events? Yeah, absolutely. Here's the real question though. At what point is the analysis wrong, and it's really truly time to be looking for like significantly new lows below $15,500? I don't really have a great answer for that, other than the obvious, which is not that helpful. I would say maybe like the best or like the earliest time that I really start to feel very comfortable, calling for like majorly new lows would be with like a weekly closure below 17.5, probably 17.5. I know a lot of people are looking at 18.5. Perhaps that's fair game as well. But for me, I'd say 17.5 would kind of be the area. And at that point, have to be looking, likely towards majorly new lows. Until then, I still don't really have the data that would suggest, or at least it's not that I don't have the data. It's like when I'm looking at the probabilities, when I'm looking at the setups, and again, this is in addition to all of the other long-term macro things that we've been going over on Sundays, which we have not covered today, but are available in the past Sundays video. It's more likely that it's in than it's not. So probabilities are probabilities. At the end of the day, they're not certainties, but until proven otherwise, that's really all that I have to say about that. I think that's a good place for me to be leaving off on this particular video. I do apologize for waffling on a little bit longer than what I hoped for there, but hopefully this was in some way helpful. As always, want to be wishing you the best. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully soon.